Sometimes you see a story out there and you just have to look twice at it. You have to say, wait a second, that's got to be Babylon Bee. Hold on. Is the Onion now getting good again? Hold on. This can't be real. And I assure you, this is real. New York Post, Biden regrets leaving race, thinks he could have beaten Trump. Yes! Guys, I told you this was going to happen. I told you after the whole Kamala coup and they push him aside, I told you. This is win-win for Biden. Kamala wins the presidency. Biden can say, see, I've been vindicated. My presidency has been revalidated by the American people and my hand-chosen successor, even somebody as asinine and imbecilic as Kamala Harris, can win the presidency because she's my gal and I picked her and she's going to continue my legacy. So I'm the winner. But if Kamala Harris loses to Donald Trump, then Joe Biden come January, and here it is 2 days earlier than I expected. Joe Biden come January can say, well, I would have won. They should have never pushed me out. There's only one man in America who's ever beaten Donald Trump in an election, and it's this guy, Joe Biden would say. He's going to write a book. The title of the book, I Would Have Beat Him. The book tour is going to be glorious. He's already beginning it right here. He's gonna destroy them all. He doesn't care about loyalty. He doesn't care about these Democrats. He doesn't care about any of them. He cares about one guy, the big guy. It's beautiful. I love it. Let them fight amongst themselves to the death. It's glorious. He's also delusional. He couldn't beat Trump in the presidential race. He couldn't beat Nixon in a presidential race. And I'm not talking about Nixon back during Watergate. I'm talking about Nixon now, like dead Nixon, like Richard Nixon 20 years after his death. And Biden would still lose. Are you kidding me? But now this is what we're going to engage in. This week, at the end of the year, everyone's going to be looking back and reevaluating what happened in 2024, but also because this is the end of the Biden presidency, there's going to be a whole lot of circumspection. So what is Joe Biden's legacy after all? And sort of Biden's trying to get out in front of that and say, I would have beaten him. I should have never dropped out of the race. As if it was his idea in the first place, as if he actually voluntarily dropped out. Give me a break. That said, as I mentioned, the circumspection and the look back and the reflection by all of our media elites has already begun. And I want to tell you, this is my favorite clip of the day, which we're about to watch together for a couple of reasons. This is a panel of political and White House correspondents for CBS News, led by Major Garrett yesterday on Face the Nation. And they engage in the conversation, what was the most underreported story of the year? Now, again, as I begin this clip, I want to remind you, these are paid, elite, professional journalists, and their entire job is to cover American politics and the presidency for CBS News. Now, watch how the conversation ensues.
One of the things we also do in the year-end correspondence roundtable is dig into what was undercovered or underreported. Jan?
Undercovered, underreported. That would be, to me, Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline that became undeniable in the televised debate.
At the presidential debate with Donald Trump.
Unquestioned. And, it's starting to emerge now that his advisors kind of managed his limitations. It's been reported in the Wall Street Journal for 4 years. And yet he insisted that he could still run for president. We should have much more forcefully questioned whether he was fit for office for another 4 years, which could have led to a primary for the Democrats. It could have changed the scope of the entire election. Yet still, incredibly.
All right. I'm going to let you finish, ma'am, but this needs to be commented on just a little bit before she continues. So she says that the most underreported, undercovered story of the last year was Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline. Funny, you're right. It was obvious. And actually over right here on this screen, this one right here, on this show, on this channel at Town Hall Media, we covered it a lot, ma'am. And not just me and this voice for Town Hall across all of our websites. Town Hall, Red State, PJ Media, Hot Air, Twitch. We were talking about it. By the way, not just us at Town Hall. I'm thinking pretty much every right of center website, publication, streaming channel, broadcast news channel, cable. Well, there are no right of center broadcast news channel, cable news channels. We were all over that story, ma'am. It wasn't underreported. It wasn't undercovered. But you're right, it was obvious. In fact, when we did cover it, you all called us liars. You all said we were engaging in cheap fakes. You said that there was misinformation. You said that there's no actual evidence that Joe Biden is suffering from any mental, physical, or cognitive decline. That's what you said. That's what your colleagues said. All right, so that's number one. Number two, I want to remind you that she's sitting here navel gazing, saying, oh, yeah, we really missed that story, when that is literally their job. It's their only job. Imagine being a political reporter and admitting after the fact that you missed the only significant, important story of the year, which is the president of the United States is incapable of being president of the United States. It's like being a sports reporter and saying, yeah, you know, that whole football season, we totally missed it. Who knew that they were playing football in this country? Number three, did you catch at the very end there? She said, we should have been more aggressive on this story because it could have forced a primary process, which would have changed how the election went. In other words, the reason she's finally circumspect about her role as a political reporter in Washington, D.C. in 2024 and ignoring and choosing, frankly, to cover up rather than cover the decline of the president's physical, mental, and cognitive abilities. The reason she regrets it is if they had been on the story earlier and actually told the truth instead of covering for Joe Biden, then they would have had a primary process and maybe they would have had a better candidate who would have beaten Donald Trump. See, the real regret here is that Donald Trump won, maybe because they didn't push Biden out soon enough. They are so corrupt. They are so awful. Even when they're acting like they're admitting they got something wrong, they're actually revealing what their true intentions are. But this isn't even the best part of the clip. In a moment here, you're going to see a guy chime in. His name is Robert Costa, White House correspondent for CBS News. I think he still has a byline at Washington Post as well. Now, I just want you to know that Robert Costa, to many of us here in Washington, D.C., we used to call him Bob. I think he goes by Robert now for a couple of reasons. The first is he doesn't want to be confused with Bob Costas, the obnoxious, horribly insufferable sports guy from NBC News, because the names sound alike. Bob Costa, Bob Costas, right? But he also goes by Robert now because he's a very serious journalist. See, back when we all knew him as Bob, he was a reporter covering politics, but not for CBS News, not for Washington Post. No, he covered it for National Review. National Review, of course, is a conservative news site. And when Bob Costa was working for National Review, he was, well, there's no other word for it, conservative. But now he works for Washington Post. Now he works for CBS News. And now he's Robert. And just wait till you hear what Robert brings to the table here in discussing the biggest underreported, overlooked story of the year, Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Take it away, Bob.
We read in the Washington Post that his advisors are saying that he regrets that he dropped out of the race. You know, that he thinks he could have beaten Trump. And I think that is either delusional or they're gaslighting.
President Biden has said repeatedly he was sick during the debate June 27th in Atlanta, and he's always been fine, and he leaves fine. That is his position, the position of many of his top aides as well, even though there is that reporting.
Robert Costa.
That's just glorious. That is chef's kiss. That we got to watch it one more time.
As said repeatedly, he was sick during the debate June 27th in Atlanta, and he's always been fine, and he leaves fine.
Joe Biden has said repeatedly that he was sick that night at the debate, and he's always been fine, and he leaves office fine. Look at his face. Look at the arched eyebrow. Well, there you have it. There you have it. Thank God Robert Costa to the rescue here, sort of setting the record straight on everything. Hey, you're saying this was an underreported story, but let's just remember, everybody, Joe Biden says he's fine. And that should be the end of it. No more questions asked, because we're reporters after all. This is journalism now. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that face. I want you to remember Robert Costa and the entire panel there at CBS News Face the Nation, because there's discussion now about the President of the United States. And Robert Costa just said, hey, Joe Biden says he's fine. He said he was sick that night. He's always been fine, and he's leaving office fine. And that apparently is supposed to be the end of the story. So over the course of the next 4 years, there's going to be a lot of things said in Washington, D.C. about President Trump. And President Trump is then going to make a statement, and he's going to say that what's being reported is false, and the truth is whatever Donald Trump says it is. And I want to know if Robert Costa is going to use the Biden standard on that. Hey, everybody, stop saying that about Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has said this. And so there you have it. Do you think that's how they're going to cover the Trump presidency? Do you? So everybody, we're back to where we were in June, right before the debate. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what's clear on video. Don't believe what you're hearing, where he mangles every other word and can't put a sentence together and can barely walk. And they have to put him up the little baby stairs to Air Force One. And they got to have handlers help him walk across the South Lawn from Marine One into the White House. Don't believe any of that, because Biden says he's okay. And that's good enough for me. That's good enough for Robert Costa of CBS News. Wow. Meanwhile, over on CNN, Abby Phillips was having another one of these panels, a roundtable, to discuss the Biden legacy. And the issue was raised about Biden's, well, there's no other word for it, corruption, about his ties to his son, Hunter Biden, who he just gave a 10-year unequivocal, across-the-board pardon to for whatever crimes that he may have committed over that time while Biden was vice president and while Biden was president. And it was revealed during this panel that Abby Phillips, that woman you see right there, the host of this show on CNN, has not actually been following the news. This news host, this journalist, this teleprompter reader has no idea about one of the most important stories of the last 4, 5, 10 years, Hunter Biden and the Biden family's corruption. Behold the beauty of this moment.
I'm still waiting.
Speculative?
After 4 years of Donald Trump.
Did money not change hands?
Scott.
Did it not?
4 years of Donald Trump, 4 years of a Joe Biden DOJ looking into these very things. I'm still waiting to see.
Well, he can't be charged. He's the president.
Right? I'm
Joe
still
Biden
waiting.
Can't be charged.
I'm not talking about charges. I'm still waiting to see the proof of Joe Biden enriching himself. I take his brother and his son, perhaps.
I'll give you.
All right. So this is about to get glorious, but I just want to remind you, if you're a frequent viewer of this show, you know the answer to this already. And that is federal corruption statutes do not require that you personally enrich yourself through your actions as an elected official to be guilty of corruption and bribery and influence peddling. Okay. I'll give you the analogy that I love to give. If a father and son, let's call them Schmo and Slunter. Okay. Schmo and Slunter, father and son, criminal team. They go to rob a bank, and Slunter, the son, he gets off with all the money, and Schmo doesn't keep one penny. Well, guess what? The dad is just as guilty of robbing that bank, even though he didn't get any of the money. So here's Abby Phillips, completely ignorant of the law in question here, saying, listen, there's no evidence that Joe enriched himself. It doesn't matter. If Joe can enrich his brother or his son or some stranger through his illegal, corrupt acts, he's still guilty of, say it with me, illegal and corrupt acts. That said, of course, there is evidence that Joe has enriched himself, and Abby Phillips is about to be educated in that regard, and then watch what she does. Watch what she does. It's like, we're done. We're done here. We're done.
That is, I think that has yet to materialize. Otherwise,
I'll give you the
your
direct
colleague,
line.
James Comer, could have produced the evidence, and he didn't.
He did. A Chinese company transferred money to a shell company owned by Hunter and Jim Biden that then transferred money directly to Jim and Sarah Biden's shell company that then transferred the money to Jim and Sarah's personal account, who then immediately wrote a check for $40,000 to Joe Biden. So to say that there was no evidence, to say there was no evidence is not true. It's not true.
What I'm saying is that Trump was president for 4 years. He wanted to charge Joe Biden. Why did the charges not come? And I think that still remains an open question. If there is something illegal happening here, there should be charges on the basis of what you're saying, and there have not been.
Well, he just pardoned Hunter.
That is
for an 11-year time.
He pardoned Hunter Biden.
An 11-year time.
He just wiped the slate.
Hang on, guys.
Jim will be next, by the way.
We're waiting for the charges, and when the charges come, we'll have a conversation about that. I promise you that. Solomon Jones, thank you very much for joining.
There you go. We're done with this segment. We're going to go right to commercial. Really interesting there. There are no charges. When the charges come, then we'll talk about it. But if there are no charges, then clearly nothing went wrong. Again, I ask you to remember this moment when it comes to the Trump standard. How many times has that network called Donald Trump an insurrectionist or inspiring an insurrection or agitating for and inciting an insurrection? And yet, even though 1,000 people have been charged for the events of January 6th, you know as well as I do how many of them have been charged with insurrection. Say it with me. 0. Not one person has ever been charged with insurrection against the United States of America as it relates to the events of January 6th. But I'm pretty sure they've told us that Donald Trump led an insurrection, incited an insurrection, is guilty of insurrection. So there's the CNN Abby Phillips standard. If there are no charges, then we can't talk about it. It didn't happen, everybody. By the way, one other thing. She said James Comer in the House of Representatives, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, well, he would have brought charges if he had evidence. The House of Representatives don't bring criminal charges against people, Abby. And he did, in fact, lay out everything you just heard and a whole lot more in his report after their hearings about the corruption. And by the way, they also began impeachment proceedings because of all of that. And you saw her face start to melt as he said, okay, well, this Chinese company paid this shell company this much money. And then that shell company paid this shell company that much money. And then that shell company wired money into the personal accounts of Jim Biden. And then Jim Biden wrote a check to Joe Biden, which he then cashed and put in his account. And Abby Phillips is like, oh gosh, it's such a conspiracy theory because A to B to B to C. And you've got all that. Okay, here's the thing. That's why they call them shell companies. That's why they have like 30 shell corporations. They call them shell corporations because they play the shell game where they hide the money and they move it from one shell to the other. And it's the whole point. That's what criminal enterprises do. And if you can't keep up, you probably shouldn't have a job at CNN. Or maybe that's exactly why CNN hired you in the first place. Which moves us back to Scott Jennings, who was listening to his colleagues talk about the glowing, wonderful Biden legacy. And it took Scott Jennings to, well, as I said before, speak truth to dipshits. And here he is.
But Joe Biden's record with regard to the things that he's accomplished, I think will stand the test of time. Now, what my dear friend Scott and others will talk about, and quite frankly, I'm going to say this on it, rightfully so. It was very disturbing to learn late in the year about just how how poor his health has become. And like many, I did not realize that it had gotten to that point. That being said, I think he showed up for the job. He got the work done. I think some of the accomplishments also in the Middle East and foreign policy will also stand the test of time.
You think the Middle East is in better shape today than when he took office?
Well, I think he got our hostages home. I think that's a big deal. I think it's important.
I'm sorry, which hostages?
He's gotten a number of people home. He was able.
There's still 100 people over there.
Well, there were more than
including some Americans. Look, I think he's gonna leave office in disgrace. The Hunter Biden pardon was disgraceful. He's going to be remembered largely for inflation and for the disastrous Afghanistan pullout. And I think as we continue to, we're just getting the first draft of this now, but as we continue to learn about the massive cover-up that went on, not about his health, but about his mental acuity, to cover that up, the efforts that were undertaken by the White House staff, by his family, not in the last couple of months, but for all 4 years, I think it's going to be a really ugly chapter. It's a diminished presidency because of it. And I think we still don't know the full extent of what they did to try to hide what they've been doing over in the West Wing.
So I think leaving in disgrace is when you have an insurrection at the Capitol. Like, that's leaving in disgrace. Being impeached twice is leaving in disgrace. So that's a difference. I think Joe Biden's going to be remembered in the short term for what you were talking about, whether or not he had the capacity to lead, who knew what when. I mean, there are many people outside of the very small network of Anita Dunn and Valerie Biden Owens and Jill Biden and Hunter. There aren't many people who knew the concerns that were there or whether or not he was up or fit for the job. And so those questions will be asked. Over the long term, this is somebody a lot like Mitch McConnell. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they stood for. You don't have to agree with every vote, but you always knew they put the American people first.
Okay. It's funny how they're all saying that about Mitch McConnell now that he's gone. You know, they always have glowing things to say about Republicans when they're no longer in office or no longer holding any political power. And if they've defeated them, and also if they come through and saying mean things about Donald Trump or any Republican that's currently holding office or in power. But let's just remember that. Again, Scott Jennings, fantastic, leaving in disgrace. It is a disgrace. This entire presidency has been a disgrace. And then, of course, CNN is once again, as I told you, able to say, oh, but he didn't lead an insurrection. He didn't get impeached twice. He didn't get, that's a disgrace. That's a disgrace. Funny thing about that, because just a handful of years after these so-called disgraceful moments of 2 impeachments and an insurrection, the American people had the opportunity to agree with that dork on CNN. And, well, they didn't, did they? You see, Donald Trump came forward to the American people on Election Day and said, they say I led an insurrection. You saw for yourself what happened on January 6th and why it happened and what they did in the hearings and all of that. You see for yourself why they brought impeachment charges against me. You see for yourself what was behind the Mar-a-Lago raid. You see for yourself the Stormy Daniels thing and the E. Jean Carroll thing. You see for yourself what's going on in Atlanta, Georgia, and Fulton County with Fani Willis and her boyfriend. You see for yourself with Jack Smith and the attempts to keep me off of the ballot. I trust the American people to decide this. You've seen for yourself. If you think I'm an insurrectionist, if you think I'm a disgrace because I got impeached twice, then vote for Kamala Harris. Please go ahead. But if you think it's all bullshit, if you actually think that I should be president again, please vote for me. I leave it in your hands. And he won every single swing state. He won 312 electoral college votes. He won the popular vote. He won across the board. Nearly every single county in America moved to the right and moved to the Republican Party from the last election. And it's not just because Kamala Harris was a disaster. So you go ahead, CNN, you dead enders. You keep holding the torch. You keep the flame lit for your insurrectionist impeachment rhetoric, because it's really worked well so far. But I assure you, it's not a disgrace when you win a landslide victory and you're just 3 weeks away from being sworn in as president of the United States. Joe Biden. He did the same thing. He took it to the American people, and he couldn't even make it to Election Day. And his hand-picked successor, she got demolished. So who's the real disgrace here, really? Increased tariffs on our trade partners, that's being discussed right now. Tax cuts, hopefully we can keep them. Regulation changes. Learn why gold is a viable diversification tactic now more than ever, because all those news stories I just told you about, it's affecting your savings. It's affecting your investments and your retirement. And gold is a great way to diversify. Birch Gold, the only gold company I endorse, they're releasing their ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. And it is got a forward by Donald Trump Jr. You can get a free copy just because you know me, along with Birch Gold's free information kit on gold. All you got to do is text my name, Larry, Larry, to 989898. The facts are the national debt continues to increase. Our interest payments on the national debt continue to increase. Gold is still your hedge against a weakened dollar. Birch Gold, still the company I recommend to help you convert an existing IRA or 401k to a tax-sheltered IRA in gold, not 1 penny out of your pocket. So just text Larry, Larry, to 989898. Get your free copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. There's no obligation, just good information. Once again, that's my name, Larry, to 989898. Get your free copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era from my friends at Birch Gold.